History is full of battles decided by blades, arrows, and fire. But every now and then, a civilization is saved by something far stranger, something silent, invisible, and utterly unforgiving. And when the greatest army on earth rode into Europe in 1241, it wasn't a knight, a fortress, or a miracle that stopped them. It was a force the Mongols had never truly learned to fight. To understand how Europe survived its darkest moment, we have to go back to the very beginning, when the horsemen of the steppes seemed destined to conquer the world. It wasn't some brilliant new sword or fearsome engine of fire that saved Europe from the most terrifying army the world had ever witnessed. What stopped the Mongols was something they had almost never confronted, something that made no sound, claimed no glory, and shed no blood. And when historians talk about unstoppable war machines, nothing illustrates that idea more powerfully than the Mongol invasion of 1241. No force in recorded history had ever moved with such speed, such precision, or such cold strategic clarity. Wherever the Mongols pointed their banners, kingdoms collapsed like rotted timber. For a brief moment, it genuinely seemed as though Europe would be erased. Entire realms crumbled within weeks. Yet the truly fascinating part is how that early domination eventually met its limits. What was the hidden force that halted the Mongol advance? How did Europe manage to push back against the greatest cavalrymen ever known? And what happened when the Mongols returned, only to encounter a continent no longer helpless? Before we uncover what destroyed their campaign, we must understand how the Mongols shredded Europe's finest armies with terrifying ease. The rise of their empire was no accident. It was forged by a lethal combination of unparalleled mobility and long-range firepower that medieval Europe simply had no answer for. European warfare at the time followed an unspoken code. Two armies meeting face-to-face in open ground, smashing into each other in a contest of raw strength and courage. But the Mongols fought an entirely different kind of war, fluid, psychological, and razor-precise. They turned deception into an art form. Their iconic feigned retreat, pretending to flee, drawing the enemy into pursuit, and then pivoting to crush them, worked flawlessly because European commanders could not imagine retreat being a calculated trap. Their mounted archers formed the heart of this deadly system. Each warrior could loose arrows at full gallop with astonishing accuracy, striking targets at distances most soldiers couldn't dream of. Picture entire columns of horse archers swirling around your army, launching armor-piercing arrows long before your sword could reach a single enemy. Meanwhile, Europe's knights, magnificent in armor but built for short, brutal charges, were almost the perfect victims. Their gear was heavy, their horses tired quickly, and after one powerful attack, the cohesion of their formation often collapsed. They were never designed for the fluid, hit-and-run warfare the Mongols perfected. But the Mongols' greatest advantage wasn't just their weapons. It was their discipline. Their armies were arranged in strict units of tens, hundreds, thousands, and 10,000s, each led by officers capable of adjusting instantly on the battlefield. Even after heavy casualties, their formations remained coordinated. Fresh units rotated into combat like clockwork, something almost no Western army could match. By contrast, many European forces, especially the Hungarians, were fragmented. Local nobles commanded their own contingents, and when the tide turned, communication disintegrated. Defeat could erupt in minutes. Two battles in particular revealed the full terror of Mongol tactics. Mohi in Hungary and Legnica in Poland both fought in 1241. At Mohi on April 11th, the Hungarians held what should have been a strong defensive line along the Sejo River, bridges, wagons, fortifications. But Subutai, perhaps the most brilliant strategist of the era, executed a flawless encirclement. His troops crossed the river at night using pontoon bridges, launched devastating arrow barges, and crushed the Hungarians before they could mount a unified defense. Believing the Mongols were falling back, the Hungarians charged, straight into a perfectly prepared trap. By sunrise, the battlefield was ruined. Tens of thousands lay dead or fleeing, many cut down before ever reaching hand-to-hand range. Shockingly, the Mongols even deployed siege equipment in open battle, catapults, and possibly early gunpowder tools learned from the Chinese, hurling destruction into dense infantry formations. Imagine the horror of seeing machines normally used against fortress walls turned loose against soldiers. Legnica in Poland unfolded much the same. Courageous European knights surged forward in mighty charges, only to be swallowed by Mongol feigned retreats and exterminated from every direction. Those twin disasters cracked open Europe's heart. Poland, Hungary, even the Holy Roman Empire stood exposed. For months, nothing seemed capable of stopping the steppe warriors. And then, something unexpected happened. Textbooks often claim the Mongols withdrew in 1242 solely because their great Khan, Ogdi, had died. That explanation is true, but incomplete. When news of his death arrived in late 1241, Badu and Khadan didn't immediately turn for home. They remained in Hungary for months. If politics were the only reason, why stay? The deeper truth lies not in drama, but in logistics. The Mongol engine lived on speed, open plains, and grasslands. Their horses required vast, grazing fields, and their tactics depended on maneuvering space. But Europe was no sprawling steppe. It was a maze of forests, rivers, mountains, and limited pasture. Their strongest advantage was slowly turning into a crippling weakness. Hungary's plains gave them breathing room, but pushing westward into Central Europe strangled their mobility. Thick forests slowed their movement, supply lines grew dangerously thin, and horses began to starve. Villages were burned or deserted, leaving little food. And despite their victories, the Mongols had suffered far more casualties than most imagine. Every lost horseman was a critical loss, not just in combat, but in scouting, coordination, and mobility. Their war machine, unstoppable on the steppe, was beginning to grind under the weight of Europe's terrain. At the heart of Mongol strategy lay one uncompromising belief: speed decides everything. They were artists of momentum, striking so quickly and so precisely that their enemies often surrendered out of sheer terror before the real battle had even begun. Their philosophy could be distilled into one icy warning whispered across the steppe: submit now, or die later. But there was a catch. That doctrine only worked when the fight unfolded on open ground. When an enemy retreated behind high stone walls and refused to meet them in the field, the Mongol war machine began to sputter. Siege warfare was slow, agonizingly slow, and every day spent waiting outside a gate meant horses that weren't grazing, mobility bleeding away, and the clock ticking against them. Mongol commanders understood this perfectly. Before committing to a siege, they often performed what we now call a brutal cost-benefit calculation. If a fortress looked like it would drain too many men or too much time, they simply rode past it in search of easier targets. And the numbers show why. Take Xiangyang in China, one of the most heavily defended cities on Earth at the time. The Mongols were forced to deploy more than 100,000 troops and spend years constructing new siege engines just to bring it down. Compare that to the entire force that invaded Europe in 1241, somewhere between 60,000 and 80,000 men total. In other words, conquering a single Chinese fortress required more manpower than the entire European campaign. There was no realistic way for them to besiege dozens of fortified stone cities scattered across Europe. And that leads to the Mongols' next major problem: technology. One of the most unexpected weapons that helped Europe endure the Mongol onslaught was the humble crossbow, a tool so simple a farmer could wield it, yet powerful enough to punch straight through Mongol armor. Unlike a traditional bow, which relied on raw upper body strength and constant tension, a crossbow held its string locked, allowing the shooter to aim calmly from the safety of a wall. The result was deadly accuracy. The bolts, stubby, heavy quarrels, weren't just piercing leather or lamellar armor. They could rip through chainmail and bury themselves into the flesh beneath it. Tests on modern replicas show a quarrel could pierce over 1 millimeter of steel plate at close range, more than enough to kill a rider or drop a warhorse instantly. And here's where strategy comes into play. Crossbows didn't require a lifetime of training like longbows or composite bows. A peasant, a shopkeeper, even an elderly defender could become a competent crossbowman with a bit of practice. Inside a fortress, everyone suddenly mattered. European defenders adopted a simple rule: don't aim for the warrior, aim for the horse. A dismounted Mongol was no longer a lightning-fast cavalryman. He was just another infantryman trapped beneath a wall. In a siege, that one tactical shift could change everything. But weapons alone didn't stop the Mongols. Their unmatched strength was mobility, their ability to flow around obstacles like water. So defenders learned how to take that mobility away. That's where anti-cavalry barriers came in. Imagine a large wooden frame studded with iron spikes, shaped almost like a giant jagged star. This was the cheval de frise, an old defensive invention that could be rolled into position to block any charge. Its origins stretch back to ancient China, where similar anti-horse devices called jiama were used centuries earlier. Combined with trenches, pits, and stake fields, these obstacles turned the Mongols' greatest asset into a liability. A single misstep could break a formation, and once that happened, crossbow volleys did the rest. And if Mongol warriors ended up fighting on foot, they met dense formations of spears, pikes, and long polearms. In tight formations like the Schiltrin, infantry became a living forest of spearheads, nearly impossible for dismounted cavalry to penetrate. Yet the greatest shift of all came from something immovable: stone. The Mongols were legendary for absorbing the knowledge of the peoples they conquered. Persian, Chinese, and Muslim engineers followed their armies, building catapults, trebuchets, and even early gunpowder weapons. But the force that stormed Europe under Béla Khan lacked the full engineering might of the empire. The Golden Horde was designed for speed, not for hauling massive counterweight trebuchets across thousands of miles of steppe and forest. They did bring lighter stone throwers, useful against wooden walls and earthworks, but once they confronted Europe's thick stone fortresses, everything changed. Compared to the sun-dried brick or rammed earth defenses common in Asia, Europe's stone walls were practically invincible. Stone throwers that could pulverize timber barely left a scratch on these fortifications. Nowhere was this contrast more dramatic than at Esztergom, the wealthiest and most important city in medieval Hungary. Béla Khan targeted it for a simple reason. It was full of gold, relics, and the kind of treasure that fueled Mongol campaigns. The outer defenses, mostly wood and earth, collapsed quickly. But once defenders retreated into the stone citadel, the Mongols hit a wall in every sense of the word. They hauled up around 30 catapults and bombardment engines, hammering the citadel day and night. Nothing worked. Stones that could smash wooden forts simply shattered uselessly against solid masonry. So Badu ordered a direct assault. It was a catastrophe. Crossbow fire rained down from the ramparts, cutting down attackers long before they reached the walls. Every attempt to storm the citadel ended the same way, in blood. The Mongols finally realized that even with dozens of siege engines, they simply didn't have the tools needed to break a true stone fortress. The counterweight trebuchets they would later use so effectively in Asia, thanks to Persian engineers, never reached Europe in time. Europe's stone walls had done what no army could. They stopped the Mongols cold. In 1242, the Mongols simply did not possess the kind of siege machines in Europe that had made them unstoppable in Asia. What they brought westward were light, torsion-powered catapults, excellent for smashing wooden palisades, but almost worthless against solid stone. The failure at Esztergom made something brutally clear. Conquering Europe would require reshaping their entire army into a slow, supply-heavy siege force, the very opposite of what made the Mongols terrifying. They would need vast counterweight trebuchets, enormous supply trains, and permanent camps. In other words, they would have to abandon the essence of Mongol warfare. For the first time in the campaign, Badu Khan confronted a prize he could not claim. The citadel of Esztergom remained defiantly standing. As Badu pushed after King Béla IV into Croatia and the harsh lands of Dalmatia, Geography itself turned traitor. The region was a labyrinth of jagged mountains, narrow passes, and stone valleys, terrain perfectly designed to break the momentum of horsemen. The open, sweeping movement that powered Mongol warfare collapsed. Their horses could barely trot. Their formations shattered on the rocks. And worse still, Croatian fighters ambushed them relentlessly from the cliffs and passes, inflicting steady, painful losses. By spring of 1242, the Mongols reached the fortresses of Klis and Trogar, stone strongholds perched like eagle nests high above the valleys. These citadels were not just difficult to reach, they were nearly impossible to surround. Their defenders knew every path, every ridge, every advantage. When the Mongols assaulted Klis in March 1242, they were hit with a storm of resistance. The stone walls shrugged off the bombardment. Attack after attack failed, leaving the hillside littered with casualties. Trogar held firm as well. Everywhere the Mongols turned, the story repeated. Stone endured, and the steppe warriors bled for every step. Then the truth became impossible to ignore. They could burn villages, destroy armies, and terrorize entire regions, but they could not hold what they conquered. Europe's true wealth, its kings, its treasuries, its power, was safeguarded behind stone walls that speed and intimidation could not crack. So the Mongols did the one thing no European expected. They retreated. But the story didn't end there. By 1285, Europe would face the Mongols again. The memory of 1241 still haunted the continent. Charred towns, slaughtered armies, the near collapse of the Hungarian kingdom. But the second Mongol invasion, led by Nogai Khan and Talabuga, would be nothing like the first. This time, the Mongols lost. Badly. This new campaign came more than 40 years after the death of Ogedei Khan. A key detail, because it completely destroys the old claim that the Mongols left Europe in 1242 only because of politics. If internal turmoil had been the true reason for their withdrawal, then the 1285 invasion, free from succession crises, should have steamrolled Hungary. Instead, it became a disaster. The invasion lasted barely 2 months, from late 1285 to early 1286. Compare that to the original invasion, which lasted more than a year and smashed its way across Central Europe. This time, the Mongols slammed into a Hungary that had rebuilt itself into a fortress. The result? Nearly the entire Mongol force was wiped out. Hungarian losses were minimal. Historians have only one way to describe it: near total destruction of the Mongol army. So what changed? After the catastrophe of 1241, King Béla IV looked out across a devastated kingdom and recognized the hard truth. His wooden fortifications had failed. So he unleashed one of the most ambitious reconstruction projects of the Middle Ages. Between 1242 and 1300, Hungary built 147 to 172 new stone castles, an entire network of defenses designed explicitly to stop the Mongols. And Béla did something ingenious. He tied this building program to the feudal system. Any noble who wanted land had to build a stone fortress first. In less than 2 generations, the defensive landscape of Hungary and much of Central Europe was transformed. These weren't isolated castles. They were a web of fortifications, each close enough to support the others. Modern strategists call this defense in depth. Even if a field army failed, the Mongols would still face hundreds of stone redoubts, each capable of holding out for weeks or months. But a nomadic army cannot sit still. They depend on movement, fresh grazing, and constant foraging. The Mongols simply could not besiege 100 castles. They lacked the supplies, the manpower, and above all, the time. Hungary's new defenses weren't just strong. They were unsiegeable. Castle designs grew more sophisticated as the years passed. Concentric walls created deadly kill zones. Moats and artificial lakes slowed attackers. Angled towers eliminated blind spots. New innovations, like projecting galleries, allowed defenders to shoot straight down on enemies digging at the foundations. Every architectural decision served one purpose: ensure that if the Mongols ever returned, they would fail. And in 1285, Béla's legacy was put to the test. Nogai Khan's forces charged into Hungary using their classic hit-and-run tactics, trying to sweep around static defenses. But the new Hungary was no longer the open plain the Mongols once ravaged. Everywhere they stood stone walls they could not breach. Every attempted flanking maneuver was blocked by fortresses, rivers, or towns fortified to the teeth, towns whose crossbowmen fired bolts designed to pierce Mongol armor. Sieges dragged on until winter struck, supplies evaporated, and disease spread. By the end, the Mongols were no longer invading Hungary. They were running from it. Hungarian forces harried them relentlessly as they retreated through the Carpathians, inflicting catastrophic losses. Contemporary chronicles suggest the Mongol army was almost completely destroyed. This second invasion provides one of the clearest proofs in medieval history. Europe's survival wasn't about political luck. It was about technology, stone, engineering, and fortification. If politics had been the main factor in 1242, then this second invasion, led by competent commanders, free of internal turmoil, should have succeeded. But it didn't. The rivers were the same. The plains were the same. The terrain was the same. What had changed was the structure of the landscape. Hungary, once devastated, had become a shield wall of stone, and that transformation marked the moment Europe turned the tide. After 1286, the Mongols never again attempted a full-scale invasion of Central Europe. Not because of diplomacy, not because of distance, but because the cost had become unbearable.